New developments last week in the debate over the state of the state's roads. Governor Walker told the Department of Transportation to submit its budget early this year. And the governor said again he's opposed to raising the gas tax or vehicle registration fees without a corresponding cut in taxes elsewhere in the budget. We've heard a variety of viewpoints on a road funding fix in recent weeks, and we are continuing the discussion today with Republican Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald. Leader Fitzgerald, good to have you back on the program.
Good to be with you again.
So we seem to have this interesting political situation that's developed where you've got people in the assembly, leadership, and the governor on opposite sides of this transportation funding issue. Where do you fall in this discussion?
I mean, I think we should start talking about where's the reduction first. This is not something new from Governor Walker. He's said this in the past. We need some type of reduction. And I think the caucuses want to have a discussion about where's the tax cut first. So I've been pushing that idea more so than talking about revenue streams related to transportation. Let's talk about the tax cut. And I think there's a willingness. There's definitely in this kind of, while the legislature's out this political season, a couple of coalitions coming together saying, whether it's personal property tax reduction or whether it's the top of the income tax bracket or utility tax. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could be reduced. Let's have that discussion first before we start talking about more revenue into transportation.
You think it is possible to have a tax cut given the fiscal realities the state faces? You still think that's possible?
I do, and I think what you're going to see is it's a little premature to have exactly what the size of that would be, because we won't know until probably January, and maybe even beyond that, of just about how much revenue the state will have and whether or not the state's economy is continuing to expand. So it's odd to have this discussion at the beginning of summer versus what we might see even after the election cycle. But let's talk about the tax cuts first, and then we can revisit transportation later on.
So you're in the governor's corner on this one. You think there really has to be a discussion of tax cuts before there can be any discussion. In fact, you don't want to raise the gas tax. You don't want to raise vehicle registration fees.
Well, he set the table for this, and he did it almost 4 years ago by saying, listen, I need some kind of equal reduction in another part of taxation. Well, let's figure out what that is first, and then we can move on from there.
What's going to happen with abortion legislation in light of the Supreme Court ruling last week that struck down part of the Wisconsin abortion laws, the admitting privileges for doctors' part? Is there going to be more abortion legislation coming before the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, it was a setback, and I think many of us that worked on that legislation feel like we were kind of hanging in limbo depending on what the Supreme Court did with Texas. And, it was pretty swift the way that came down and pretty decisive. So it may tamper some bills from being authored next session, but there's always going to be, I think, a number of legislators that are going to continue to kind of dig in on that issue and continue to make incremental progress. So I anticipate that we probably will see some legislation in the future.
Let's talk about Donald Trump. Back in April, you said after it became clear that he would be the presumptive nominee, you said it's time to get on board the Trump train, and that you thought he could help Wisconsin Republicans in the election this year. Is it still your position that it's time to get on board the Trump train, and have people gotten on board?
Probably even more so. And for a lot of different...
It's time to get on board.
It is time. It is time to coalesce around the Trump campaign. If you want Ron Johnson reelected, if you want to win the 8th Congressional, the State Senate, the Assembly, the only way to do that is by starting at the top. You can't just suddenly insert yourself in the middle of that process. There's too much at stake from a logistics standpoint, the way we've always organized campaigns in the GOP. And, it can be stuff as specific as get out the vote. I mean, it's hard to do that unless you've got a presidential campaign that's also driving that message. So I'm anticipating going to the campaign centers throughout the state and making the case that, hey, we're going to be in a place where I think we can come together and still make this work. There's still a lot of time. I know some people think, oh boy, the clock is ticking, we'll never get this pulled together, but I'm not in that camp. I think we can make it work.
Why do you think there's still resistance in some parts of Wisconsin? Prominent conservative talk radio hosts will not get on board. They do not think that Donald Trump is your party's nominee or should be your party's nominee, they think it's a mistake.
They got to think bigger than where they're at right now. I know it's not just about the nominee. It's about everything else that goes along with who eventually is that presidential campaign about. If we don't get there after the convention specifically, there's going to be some fallout from that, and we just don't know how significant it'll be.
And you still think he could help Wisconsin Republicans in their elections this
I do.
fall?
I mean, I think Donald Trump visiting the state and campaigning here in a targeted state, which I believe Wisconsin is starting to look more and more like it is in that category, you're going to need Trump here. And I think in some of these other states like Ohio, that are going to be those states that could swing the election, that's going to make a difference to have his presence here and him working those states.
Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald, thanks very much for your time today. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And my conversation with Senator Fitzgerald continues now on our website, WISN.com, where we're talking about a Republican plan to reform some Milwaukee public schools. The commissioner leading that effort quit last week. You'll find Senator Fitzgerald's thoughts on that on the upfront section of WISN.com. The state will pay $75,000 to settle a case involving a radio host who was arrested at the state capitol. Why arrests at the Capitol could become an even bigger legal deal when Upfront continues. The Solidarity Singers, as they're known, have been a fixture at noontime at the state capitol ever since the protests of Act 10 5 years ago. But now state taxpayers are going to pay for a settlement with a Madison radio host who was arrested when Capitol Police cracked down on the protests in 2013. The state will pay $75,000 to Dominic Salvia, co-host of the Devil's Advocates program on the Mike 92.1, although we should say some of that money is clearly going for legal costs. Dom Salvia and his co-host, Mike Crute of the Devil's Advocates, join us now on Upfront. Gentlemen, it's good to have you on the program.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Dominic, let's begin with you and help people understand why you have pursued this matter in court. Why is it so important to you?
It's a First Amendment issue, certainly. I want to make it very clear, I voted for Scott Walker in the recall. I did not go down to the Capitol that day to seek any sort of arrest. Crute and I had a previous lunch engagement. 9 minutes from when I left my car door on the street to handcuffs. In that time, about 4 minutes in the rotunda, reading the sign, observing the situation, taking pictures, police officers walk up to me, inform me I'm participating in a protest, and of course I was not, and proceeded to arrest me for no reason, even after I turned around and walked away in compliance with their orders to leave. That's a problem.
You said you were also arrested at this protest, Mike Crute.
Yeah, but I had crossed the line. Dominic represented and was there acting as working media.
Mm-hmm.
I made a conscientious effort and a decision. I was so abhorred by what I was seeing that day, Mike. They were handcuffing little old ladies, and I didn't like it. And I took a conscious decision, made a conscious step. I knew I was getting arrested, and I knew that as a guy who does okay in business, separate from the radio show, I had the resources to get a good attorney and to go fight these claims.
What's your take on this settlement? Why do you think the Walker administration and the Attorney General decided to settle now?
Well, they settled because it was going to cost them a whole hell of a lot more money if they didn't. Jeff Scott Olson is a really good attorney, and he's quite pricey as well. And I think at this point, they just wanted to be done with it. There's going to be more coming. I think this is a good point for them to say, hey, there was absolutely really no reason. Of course, in the settlement, they never admit liability of any sort.
Right.
But it was very evident that they were wrong in this decision to arrest me, and I don't know how they could not settle. To go to court, I think it'd be even a bigger mess for this administration.
Federal trial date was set for October 24th, right before the November election. I think that factored in as well.
So let's talk now about what's next. And both of you have said that this is not done here, that there's likely to be a class action lawsuit. What would the class action lawsuit accomplish at this point in time?
Well, all 300 plus of the prior citations and arrests were under what has been ruled an unconstitutional code, emergency rules. They've since expired. It's gone to the Wisconsin Court of Appeals, State v. Crute, that's me. And we've already fought the criminal side of this. All of these tickets have already been dismissed because the arrests were unconstitutional. Well, Dominic drew first blood in the federal courts, and it is hard to get justice in the Wisconsin courts anymore if you know the eventuality is you could end up before a partisan Supreme Court. So we're going to the federal courts. It's not if, it's when. We got to get through the conventions, Philly and Cleveland, but when we get back, our attorney assures us I will be a litigant in a class action suit. He has over 75 assembled clients to date, and that number will grow. But each of those people we think have a valid claim for damages against the state of Wisconsin because the courts have already found, and it's been upheld by the Wisconsin Appeals Court, unconstitutional. All of these arrests made by the Walker administration were unconstitutional.
Well, let me have you address this point because clearly this is a very important matter to the two of you and to the other people who were arrested. But if there's a class action lawsuit and there are damages, state taxpayers end up paying. Does that give either one of you pause about continuing to pursue this?
If I can, Dominic, no, absolutely not. We find out the governor and the taxpayers are wasting $300 million a year on a manufacturer and agribusiness credit that's not generating any jobs. So why should we feel bad? I mean, if the governor can waste money on litigation like the anti-abortion admitting rules, they were taking that one to the U.S. Supreme Court. Mike, there's no reason for us to feel bad if we're unconstitutionally arrested and the state is forced to pay damages. I'm going to cash the check, sir.
While certainly I do have some reservations as a taxpayer, I never liked this, but this is a result of this administration and the folks that voted him in. I guess the greater concern that I have, and what I hope the takeaway is this, as you mentioned, this is important to us and those that are arrested. This is important for everybody in the state of Wisconsin. We hear a lot of, if this were Governor Doyle or President Obama, or if the never Trumpers, if this was Donald Trump arresting people like this, it would be all over the news. But since it's in Wisconsin, this is run and owned by Republicans, they just poo-poo the whole thing. It's like, oh, no big deal. We'll sweep it under the rug. This is a very important First Amendment case. I think everybody should be concerned. If you're concerned about an authoritarian government, we got it right here in Wisconsin.
Dominic Salvia and Mike Crute, they are the hosts of the radio show in Madison, Devil's Advocates. Thanks very much for being with us today. We appreciate it.